American journalists in particular. There's been a great deal of investigative reporting. And it does appear that these movals of detainees around the world in order to be tortured included bringing non-Uzbeks to Uzbekistan. But I couldn't pretend I knew that at the time. I knew people were being brought in, but I kind of presumed they were just Uzbeks. That was bad enough because of what was going to happen to them. But now, of course, we know it was all part of a much wider CIA operation.
So what was the reaction of the Foreign Office when you reported it to them, and the CIA when you conveyed this message to the CIA station?
Well, the Foreign Office were fairly hostile to me from a fairly early stage when I started telling them bad things about the Karimov regime and also saying that I couldn't understand why the Americans in particular were giving such strong support to this regime. I was viewed as rocking the boat, and I was told, directly told, that London thought I was being unpatriotic and not supporting the war on terror. When London really started getting hostile was when I started saying that MI6 didn't ought to be accepting intelligence from the Uzbek security services because it had been got under torture. And at that stage, London sort of reached a new level of hostility, if you like. I first of all spoke with the CIA in Tashkent. I actually asked my deputy to go and call on the American embassy and say to them, look, we're getting this intelligence from MI6 that's come from the CIA, from the Uzbek intelligence services. We think it's got under torture. She reported back to me that she'd been to see the CIA at the American embassy, and they'd said that they didn't see any problem with it being with torture. As far as the CIA were concerned, torture was part of the game now, post-September the 11th. Obviously I found that fairly shocking. So I went back to London, complained about intelligence obtained under torture, and also I said that the intelligence was rubbish anyway. It was all this stuff saying that, you know, Hizb ut-Tahrir are connected to Al-Qaeda and the Uzbek opposition are connected to Osama bin Laden. It was all not true. It was what the Uzbeks and the CIA wanted us to believe, in effect. It wasn't actually the truth. And when I started saying that, London got very tetchy indeed. I got called back to a meeting in March, at which I was rather carpeted, and I was told that London's view was it was perfectly legal for us to use intelligence obtained under torture. But they said that as long as we didn't do the torturing ourselves, there was nothing in international law to say that we couldn't get material from torture. That astonished me, because that's not actually the view of any independent international lawyers. And I was told that Jack Straw himself had made the decision that we should obtain torture material. And in fact, I understand that only last week Jack Straw has in fact confirmed that now to members of the House of Commons, that he has decided we should obtain torture material. I mean, I'm still horrified and astonished by this, but what annoyed London most of all was when I kept saying, look, this material's just not true. It's all an exaggeration. It's exaggerating the links of Hizb ut-Tahrir, the IMU, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, the Uzbek opposition parties. It's trying to make out that any opposition to Karimov and any religious Uzbeks are Al-Qaeda. And that's simply not true. But that wasn't what London wanted to hear. After that time in March, that meeting in March, I was kind of increasingly isolated, and I was more or less sort of sent to Coventry. I kept sending reports back to London, but I wasn't getting anything back. Then in August 2003, I suddenly was confronted by the Foreign Office with these incredible allegations. They said I was an alcoholic. They said I was offering visas in exchange for sex. They said I was stealing money from a post account. I mean, really, every nasty slur you could throw at someone. And at the same time, these allegations were leaked to the media, so they're basically just trying to destroy my good name undermine my credibility. And that was obviously, you know, quite astonishing, an incredible thing to happen to someone. And I couldn't really believe it was happening. And I did at that stage suffer you know, a nervous breakdown, in effect, because I'd never expected to have my good name attacked in that way. And really my relationship with Foreign Office never recovered. In the end, they had to drop those allegations because there wasn't a shred of evidence for any of them. I mean, just completely untrue. And at the time they presented me the allegations, they said I had 1 week in which to resign, or the allegations would become public. I refused to resign, which they didn't expect. I decided to stay and fight it out. And then, of course, they had to try and prove the allegations, and they couldn't because they were completely untrue. So I went back to Uzbekistan in January 2004 and carried on as ambassador for a while. But eventually they got rid of me. They sacked me in effect.
I read in one of your interviews that you conveyed it also to the British ambassadors in other posts in Europe. What response did you get from them?
Privately, I had quite a lot of support from other ambassadors. I had a lot of sort of emails and letters and notes of support. But there wasn't anyone else prepared to stick their neck out as far as I was, if you see what I mean. People were willing to say in private, yeah, you know, what you're saying is absolutely right. We think it's appalling, it's dreadful. I'm glad someone's standing up. But in terms of, if you like, going public, or even within the office, sort of admitting to supporting what I was saying, I think most other people were rather too career-oriented to do that.
How do you view the war on terror?
I mean, no one can doubt that what happened on September 11th was a dreadful thing. But I do think we've got to keep it in perspective. And I've got no doubt at all that the security services are extremely happy to exaggerate the threat. You know, we've got stupid policemen running around saying there are 200 active terrorists out there trying to blow us all up. Well, it's simply not true. And much of that is based on this kind of intelligence I was seeing in Uzbekistan. If I'd been in Saudi Arabia or Egypt, I would have been seeing similar material from there. Again, exaggerating Al-Qaeda, exaggerating Osama bin Laden. And I think it's worth saying often that no one on the UK mainland has ever been killed by an Islamic terrorist. You know, there has been no Islamic terrorism on the UK mainland that's killed anyone. I remember in the 1970s, I actually personally was twice knocked over by the blast from IRA attacks in London, and lost all the windows of my office on one occasion. And then we didn't have all this madness about locking people up without trial and confining them to house arrest and all that sort of stuff. And that was a much more real threat. And I don't think there's any reason to suppose that if Tony Blair hadn't been stupid enough to follow George Bush into attacking Iraq, we would have been a target at all. You know, it seems to me that politicians have got an interest in talking up the threat, making everyone feel scared, and in doing so, effectively criminalising the Muslim community in the UK in order to increase their own power. And the security services have got an interest in feeding the politicians with intelligence material that exaggerates the threat, because that increases not only the powers but also the budgets of the security services. So I'm not saying there is no threat. Obviously there's some threat. Terrorism is a terrible thing. But an awful lot of it is hard sell and exaggeration. I mean, you think of when they were sending tanks to Heathrow Airport, and if someone was trying to hijack a plane or put a bomb on a plane, what use would a tank be? Seriously, how do you stop a man getting on a plane using a tank? It was complete public relations hype. And I think that's what an awful lot of this war on terror is. I think people should be profoundly sceptical, both of the politicians and of the police and the intelligence services.
Can you please describe to me the general economic situation in Uzbekistan from your experience?